The young billionaire was about to buy a gold necklace when a homeless girl asked, "Miss, how many plates of food does that buy? My brothers haven't eaten in 2 days." She was left speechless by that question. Eleanor Harrington could not recall the last time she felt anything real. As she walked through the bustling downtown shopping district, the heels of her designer shoes tapped against the marble floor in a monotonous rhythm that echoed the emptiness inside her. 30 years old, owner of a fashion empire inherited from her father, and yet nothing seemed to fill the space that grew within her day by day. "Miss Harrington, would you like to try this one as well?" The saleswoman smiled, holding out another gold necklace for her. Eleanor nodded without much enthusiasm. Her wardrobe was already full of extremely expensive jewelry, designer handbags, and shoes she only wore once. But buying something new always gave her a few minutes of distraction. "This one is unique, a limited piece, solid gold with handcrafted detailing," the saleswoman explained, while Eleanor watched the necklace's reflection on her neck in the mirror. "I'll take it," she said automatically, without even asking the price. She never asked. Numbers didn't matter when her bank account seemed endless. The transaction was quick. She swiped her black credit card, made a graceful signature, and accepted the refined packaging. One more item in her collection of failed attempts to feel something. Stepping out of the store, the afternoon sun lit up the main avenue. Eleanor adjusted her sunglasses and gripped the bag that held her newest purchase. $20,000 tucked into a decorative paper bag. Money she spent without a second thought. That was when she felt a slight tug on her silk skirt. "Ma'am." Eleanor looked down and saw a small girl, messy brown hair, a simple dress with a few stains, and eyes, huge, expressive eyes that seemed far older than her small body. "Ma'am," the girl repeated, pointing to the bag in Eleanor's hand. "How many plates of food does that buy?" Eleanor blinked, confused. The question was simple, but it fell on her shoulders like a heavy weight. "What's in that bag?" the girl continued naturally. "How much food can you buy with it?" For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt something different. It wasn't the fleeting satisfaction of an expensive purchase or the momentary pleasure of a hollow compliment. It was discomfort, a deep discomfort that caught her off guard. Well, Eleanor stammered, realizing she had never thought about that. "A lot, I guess." The girl nodded, as if she were solving a complicated math problem. "My name is Sophie," she said, extending a small, dirty hand. "I'm 6 years old." Eleanor hesitated before shaking the child's hand. "I'm Eleanor." "You look sad," Sophie observed, tilting her head. The child's candor left Eleanor speechless. "I'm not sad," she replied automatically. "I'm just busy," Sophie shrugged. "My mom used to say that too." Something about the use of the past tense made Eleanor pay more attention. "Where is your mom, Sophie?" The girl looked down at her own feet, wearing worn-out sneakers. "She left?" "Who are you with now?" Sophie pointed to a nearby alley. "With my brothers. Ben is 4, and Oliver is 3. I take care of them." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. A 6-year-old child taking care of 2 younger siblings. She looked in the direction Sophie indicated and saw, partially hidden behind a dumpster, 2 small boys watching them intently. "Do you live around here?" Sophie shrugged again, a gesture that seemed far too grown up for her size. "We stay wherever we can. Today it's here." Eleanor swallowed hard. The life she led, the worries she had, wondering which handbag matched which shoes or which restaurant was trending, suddenly seemed absurdly trivial. "Have you eaten today?" The girl shook her head. "Yesterday we found half of a good sandwich in the trash outside the restaurant, but we haven't had anything today." The bag in Eleanor's hand suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. $20,000. How much food could that buy? Clothes. A safe place for 3 children to sleep. "Sophie, would you like to have dinner with me? You and your brothers?" The girl's eyes lit up, but she quickly looked wary. "We can't go with strangers." "Of course," Eleanor nodded, impressed by the child's caution. What if we eat right here, at a restaurant? You can watch me the whole time, and if you feel uncomfortable at any point, you can leave. Sophie considered the offer for a moment, the weight of responsibility heavy on her tiny shoulders. Okay, I'll go get them. Eleanor watched as Sophie ran over to her brothers. The oldest, Ben, seemed mistrustful, but the youngest, Oliver, smiled right away. After a brief conversation, the three walked over to Eleanor together. Ben partially hid behind his sister, while Oliver stared at Eleanor with curious eyes and his mouth slightly open. "Are you a princess?" Oliver asked, pointing to Eleanor's elegant dress. She smiled, feeling something unfamiliar in her chest. "No, I'm just a regular person." "But you have pretty clothes," the boy insisted. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd thanked someone for a genuine compliment. "I know a great place nearby. They have huge burgers." The children's faces lit up at the mention of burgers. Even cautious Ben looked interested. Eleanor led them to a family-friendly restaurant a couple of blocks away, feeling strangely nervous. How would she explain 3 homeless kids in an upscale place to the maitre d'? To her surprise, the restaurant seated them without any issues. Maybe her last name or the black credit card she used to reserve a private table had helped. Or perhaps it was just the universe making it easier for what seemed to be her first genuinely impulsive, altruistic act in years. "Order whatever you want," Eleanor said, watching the children gaze at the menu in awe. "It's got pictures," Oliver murmured, tracing a colorful milkshake illustration with his finger. "We don't know how to read very well," Sophie explained. "I only know some letters Mom taught me." Eleanor felt a twinge in her chest. "I can read it to you if you'd like." She spent the next few minutes describing each dish, observing how the children's eyes widened at all the possibilities. When the waiter arrived, they ordered cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes. "Is this a dream?" Ben asked softly, speaking for the first time, his voice so low Eleanor almost didn't hear. "It's not a dream," Sophie reassured her brother. "Miss Eleanor is giving us food today." The simplicity of the phrase, "giving us food," made Eleanor think about how many meals she had wasted, how many plates she barely touched in fancy restaurants because she was distracted or had no appetite. When the food arrived, Eleanor witnessed something she would never forget. The way the 3 children looked at their plates as if they were treasures. Sophie carefully arranged the napkins for her brothers, cut up the youngest's burger into smaller pieces, and made sure they ate slowly. "If you eat too fast, you can get sick," she explained to Eleanor, with the seriousness of an experienced mother. "You take very good care of them," Eleanor commented, observing the dynamic between the siblings. Sophie shrugged again, but this time Eleanor noticed the weight of that gesture, the weight of the responsibility a 6-year-old was carrying. "Someone has to," she replied simply. Between bites of their burgers and sips of their milkshakes, the children's story began to unfold. Their father had left when Oliver was just a baby. Their mother had struggled to raise the 3 alone, working 2 jobs. But life kept getting more difficult. One day, she said she was going to the store and would be right back, Sophie recounted, playing with a French fry, but she never returned. Eleanor swallowed. How long ago was that? Sophie looked up at the ceiling as though trying to recall. Many days, more than the fingers on my hands. And where were you living? In the room we shared with another family. But then the landlady said we couldn't stay if we didn't pay, so we had to leave. The clarity with which Sophie explained their situation, without drama or self-pity, just stating the facts, made Eleanor feel an overwhelming admiration for the little girl. Meanwhile, Ben and Oliver ate quietly, sometimes exchanging mischievous smiles, as if part of a secret adventure. And how have you man survived? Eleanor chose her words carefully. Sometimes we ask for food, Sophie said, or look through the restaurant trash. Some people give us money, but most pretend they don't see us. She took a sip of her milkshake. At night, we sleep wherever there aren't too many people. I let the boys sleep first while I stay awake for a bit, keeping watch. Eleanor tried to picture this tiny child protecting her brothers through the night, fighting off sleep, alert to any danger. The image made her heart ache. You don't have any relatives, no one who can help. Sophie shook her head. Mom used to say it was just the 4 of us in the world. Now it's just the 3 of us. Dinner continued, and Eleanor watched how the children ate every crumb, as if they didn't know when they'd have another full meal. When they finished, Oliver had burger sauce all the way up to his ears, and Ben looked satisfied for the first time. Thank you for the food, Sophie said formally, as though practicing a rehearsed line. That was really nice of you. Eleanor smiled but felt a lump in her throat. The idea of letting these children go back to an alley, searching for a safe place to spend the night, seemed unbearable. Where are you going now? She asked, trying to sound casual. Sophie glanced out the restaurant window. The sky was getting darker. We'll find a place to sleep. There's a park nearby with those tube slides, you know. We hide inside them. Eleanor thought of her 3-story penthouse, with its guest rooms that never had visitors, and a fridge always full of food that often spoiled before she remembered it. What if, she began, not entirely sure how to propose what she was thinking. What if you came to my home tonight? Just to take a shower and sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow we can figure out what to do. The 3 siblings exchanged looks. Ben was the one who voiced the concern. How do we know you're not bad? It was a fair question. Eleanor thought about how to respond. I can't prove I'm not bad, she answered honestly. But I promise you'll have a room to yourselves, with a door you can lock from the inside if you like. And tomorrow, if you don't want to stay, I'll bring you back wherever you want. Sophie studied Eleanor's face for a few seconds, as though searching for signs of deception. She seemed to be doing an internal calculation, weighing risks and benefits with a frightening maturity for her age. Okay, she finally decided, but we stay together the whole time. Deal, Eleanor agreed. Leaving the restaurant, Eleanor felt the weight of the bag in her hand. The gold necklace now seemed like an artifact from another world, belonging to a life that suddenly felt very distant. Sophie took Oliver's hand, and he, in turn, took Ben's, forming a small human chain. Eleanor walked beside them until they found a taxi. The driver looked suspiciously at the dirty children, but one firm glance from Eleanor was enough to silence any comment. During the ride, Eleanor observed the 3 siblings marveling at the city lights through the window, pointing at buildings and neon signs. Oliver dozed off, his head lolling to the side until Sophie gently propped it on her shoulder. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt her heart race for something that wasn't anxiety or boredom. It was fear mixed with a strange certainty. She couldn't simply return these children to the streets. Sophie's innocent question about how many plates of food her necklace could buy had toppled something inside her, a wall she'd carefully constructed to shield herself from the reality beyond her privileged bubble. When the taxi stopped in front of her building, Eleanor looked at Sophie, who stayed alert despite what had to have been an exhausting day. We're here, Eleanor said softly. Let's go in. In that moment, she had a feeling her life would never be the same again. The private elevator opened directly into Eleanor's apartment, revealing a space that made the 3 siblings stop in their tracks, mouths agape. The marble floor gleamed under soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city lights below like a sea of stars within reach. You live here? Ben asked in a hushed voice of awe. Eleanor nodded, observing her own apartment through the children's eyes. Suddenly, she noticed what had never struck her before: the vast emptiness, the lack of bright colors, the absence of any sign of life beyond the strategically placed artificial floral arrangements. It's really big, Sophie commented, holding Oliver's hand tightly as he stared in wonder at the high ceiling. Too big, Eleanor replied, realizing for the first time she was voicing that thought out loud. Come on, I'll show you where you can sleep. The children followed her down the wide hallway, their small steps echoing in the silence. Eleanor had never noticed how silent her home was, No TV background noise, no music, no voices, just the occasional hum of the central air conditioning. "There are 3 guest rooms here," she explained, opening the first door. "You can choose whether you want to stay together or have separate rooms." "Together," Sophie answered immediately, squeezing her brother's hands. "We always stay together." Eleanor noticed the fear in the girl's eyes, the fear of being separated from her brothers, possibly the only fear bigger than hunger or cold. "Sure, no problem. This room has a king-size bed. I think it'll fit all 3 of you comfortably." The children entered, and like the rest of the apartment, the decor was neutral: white, beige, grey. A large bed dominated the space, covered with perfectly stretched Egyptian cotton sheets. Oliver ran and jumped onto the bed, laughing as he sank into the plush mattress. Ben followed more cautiously, touching the sheets as if they were made of something precious. "I've never seen such a big bed," he remarked, a rare smile forming on his face. Sophie stayed by the door, her eyes scanning every corner of the room, always alert. "There's a bathroom here." Eleanor pointed to an adjacent door. "We can give you a bath before bed. Tomorrow we can shop for new clothes." "Why do you have so many rooms if you live alone?" Sophie asked with childlike frankness, once again catching Eleanor off guard. She hesitated, never really having thought about it. "I guess because I can afford it. But you're right, it's a waste. There's no one else, no brothers or father or mother." Eleanor's heart clenched. "My mother passed away when I was young. My father lives in another city, busy with the family business. So you're alone too," Sophie concluded, more like a statement than a question. Eleanor felt something catch in her throat. "I guess I am." A silence fell between them, broken only by Oliver's giggles as he bounced on the bed and Ben's attempts to get him to stop. "Let's give them a bath," Eleanor suggested, changing the subject. "They must be tired." Giving 3 children, who likely hadn't had a proper bath in days, a warm soak was a completely new experience for Eleanor. She filled the large bathtub in the guest bathroom, checking the temperature multiple times to make sure it was perfect, and found some vanilla-scented soaps from a luxury hotel stay. Oliver went first, laughing and splashing water everywhere, while Eleanor tried to keep him still long enough to wash his hair. Ben was more reserved, but his eyes lit up when Eleanor handed him a rubber duck she found in some forgotten drawer, probably an unused promotional item. Sophie was last, insisting she could wash herself. Eleanor respected her space, only helping rinse out her long, tangled hair. "Tomorrow we can untangle it better," Eleanor promised, wrapping the girl in a large, fluffy towel. With no clean clothes to offer, Eleanor improvised with some of her own t-shirts. On the children, they looked like enormous nightgowns, making Oliver twirl and laugh at how the fabric swished around him. "Looks like a ghost," he giggled, running around the room as the white shirt fluttered. "Ghosts aren't real," Ben said seriously, though a small smile tugged at his lips. Eleanor watched as the children settled into the large bed. Despite being exhausted, their eyes still reflected a mix of wonder and caution. "Are you okay here?" Eleanor asked. "I can leave the bathroom light on and the door open." Sophie nodded. "We'll be fine, but..." She hesitated. "You're not leaving, right?" The question hit Eleanor hard. This child, who'd already been abandoned, feared it would happen again. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, feeling her own sincerity. "This is my apartment. I'll be in the room at the end of the hall. If you need anything during the night, you can come get me." "Is there food tomorrow?" Ben asked sleepily. Eleanor smiled. "Of course, you can pick whatever you want for breakfast." She tucked the covers around them, a gesture she had never performed before, yet it felt natural. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night, Eleanor," Sophie replied, already settling Oliver and Ben against her in a protective gesture that made Eleanor's heart ache. Leaving the room, door slightly ajar as promised, Eleanor walked slowly to her own room. The apartment's silence now felt different, not the emptiness of before, but a gentle quiet, harboring 3 tired children in peaceful sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, still fully dressed, and for the first time noticed how lonely that huge space was. How many nights had she spent here alone, without realizing the emptiness around her? How much time had she wasted accumulating things that filled no space within her at all? That night, Eleanor slept in her clothes, her bedroom door open, ready to answer any call from the children. The sound of crying woke Eleanor from a deep sleep. For a moment, she felt disoriented, not sure where it was coming from. Then the memories of the previous night returned. 3 children, her apartment, an impulsive decision. She got up quickly and rushed to the guest room. Oliver was sitting in bed crying, while Sophie tried to comfort him. Ben was still sound asleep, as if his brother's cries were too familiar to disturb him. "What happened?" Eleanor asked, entering the room. Sophie looked at her, surprised by how quickly she'd arrived. "He had a nightmare. It happens sometimes." Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. "Hey, Oliver, it's okay. You're safe here." The boy looked at her with tear-filled eyes. "I dreamed it was dark again," he sobbed. "It's not dark here," Eleanor assured, turning on the bedside lamp. "See, there's light." Oliver sniffed, gazing around the lit room. Slowly, his crying subsided. "What time is it?" asked Sophie, rubbing her eyes. Eleanor glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's 6:30 in the morning." "That's late," Sophie remarked, as if she were used to waking up much earlier. "You usually get up earlier?" Sophie shrugged. "On the street, it's better to wake up when the sun rises. It's safer to look for food before everyone else is up." The straightforwardness of her survival strategy filled Eleanor with equal parts admiration and sadness. "Well, here you can sleep as long as you want," she said. "But since we're already awake, how about some breakfast?" Oliver immediately stopped crying at the mention of food. "Is there cereal?" "Let's see what we have," Eleanor replied, realizing she rarely ate at home and wasn't sure what they'd find in the kitchen. Ben woke up with the conversation, sitting up and looking around, as if trying to recall where he was. "Good morning," Eleanor said gently. He stared at her for a few seconds before responding timidly. "Good morning." The 4 of them went to the kitchen, a spacious area with marble countertops and stainless steel appliances Eleanor hardly ever used. She opened the fridge to find it nearly empty, just some bottles of water, a bottle of champagne, and a few yogurts. "I don't eat at home much," she explained, suddenly embarrassed by the lack of food, "but we have milk and I think there's cereal in the pantry." Sophie helped Eleanor find everything, instructing her brothers to sit on the high stools around the kitchen island. The girls seemed to have a well-established routine with them, even in this completely new environment. Eleanor located a box of cereal, some milk, and a few bananas that were still good. It wasn't the most elaborate breakfast, but the children seemed delighted. "Can I pour the milk?" Ben asked, showing a rare moment of enthusiasm. "Sure," Eleanor said, handing the milk carton to him. He grasped it with both hands. What happened next felt like it happened in slow motion. Ben tried to pour the milk into his bowl, but the carton was too heavy for his small hands. It slipped, spilling milk all over the countertop and splattering onto the floor. A tense silence filled the kitchen. Ben froze, eyes wide, staring at the puddle of milk spreading across the marble and dripping onto the floor. "I'm sorry," he whispered, fear evident in his voice. I'm sorry. Eleanor saw Sophie tense, instinctively moving closer to her brothers as if preparing to shield them. "It's okay," Eleanor said quickly, grabbing a dish towel. "It was just an accident." Ben remained still as though waiting for punishment. The way he and his siblings reacted made Eleanor wonder how people usually responded to their mistakes. "Really, it's not a big deal," she insisted, cleaning the countertop. "We still have more milk in the fridge." Slowly, the tension eased. Ben relaxed a little, though he still looked embarrassed. Sophie helped clean up, getting more towels from the drawer Eleanor pointed to. "I've never had to clean this counter before," Eleanor joked, trying to lighten the mood. "I think it felt neglected." Oliver giggled at the joke, and even Ben managed a tiny smile. The rest of breakfast went without further incidents. Eleanor watched as Sophie kept everything organized, making sure her brothers ate slowly and didn't make too much mess. She was a child caring for children, carrying a responsibility that never should have been hers in the first place. "What do you want to do today?" Eleanor asked when they finished eating. The three children looked at each other, as though the question baffled them. "Do?" Sophie repeated. "Yes, we could go out to buy you some clothes, or stay here and watch TV if you prefer." "There's a TV?" Ben's eyes lit up. Eleanor smiled. "Yes, I have one. A really big one in the living room. We used to watch TV through store windows sometimes," Sophie explained. "But it's been a while." The simplicity of the children's wishes touched Eleanor deeply. Things she considered basic, a television, food on the table, a warm bath, were rare luxuries to them. "Let's do both," she decided. "We'll first get you some clothes, then come back and watch movies. How does that sound?" "We can really pick our own clothes?" Sophie asked, uncertain. "Absolutely. You can choose whatever you want." The rest of the morning was a pleasantly hectic whirlwind. Eleanor discovered she had no idea how to dress three children in her oversized t-shirts to go shopping. After some improvisation, she managed to tie the fabric so it wouldn't drag on the ground, making Oliver laugh at how funny he looked. "Now we really do look like ghosts," he declared, spinning around and watching the white fabric swirl. At the shopping mall, Eleanor took them straight to a children's designer boutique. The sales associate tried to hide her surprise at the sight of three kids in massive t-shirts, accompanied by an obviously wealthy woman. "We need complete outfits for all three," Eleanor explained. "Everything from underwear to shoes." The next 2 hours were surreal. Sophie, initially hesitant to ask for anything, slowly started pointing out items she found pretty. Ben was enthralled by a superhero t-shirt, while Oliver wanted everything in blue. Eleanor let them pick out whatever they wanted, only offering opinions when they asked. She watched their eyes light up with each new piece, as if they were witnessing a small miracle. "This dress matches your eyes," she told Sophie, who spun slowly in front of the mirror, touching the soft fabric reverently. "I've never had a new dress before," the girl confessed. "Only used ones Mom got from somewhere." The mention of her mother created a momentary pause. Eleanor wondered what had really happened to the woman. Had she truly abandoned her children, unable to cope? Or had something worse happened? "Do you think she'll come back?" Sophie asked suddenly, still looking at her reflection in the mirror. Eleanor didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to give false hope, nor did she want to crush the girl's faith. "I don't know, Sophie," she replied honestly, "but I know that until then, you're not alone anymore." Sophie nodded, accepting the answer. There was a maturity in her gaze that made Eleanor wonder how many disappointments such a small soul had already faced. After buying not only clothes but also toothbrushes, hygiene products, some simple toys and coloring books, they returned to the apartment, arms full of shopping bags. Now dressed in their new clothes, the children looked different, not just cleaner and tidier, but somehow lighter, as if a bit of the burden they carried had been lifted, even if temporarily. Back at the apartment, Eleanor made sandwiches for lunch, a simple task she rarely did for herself, and then turned on the huge TV in the living room. "What movie would you like to watch?" she asked, scrolling through the streaming service menu. "Is there one with dinosaurs?" Ben asked, his shyness slowly fading. "I've got several," Eleanor replied, selecting an animated film. "This one's perfect for kids." All four of them settled on the large living room sofa. Oliver, without hesitation, climbed into Eleanor's lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The feeling of the small body trusting her so completely caught her by surprise, sending a rush of emotion through her that she couldn't name. Ben sat next to them, maintaining a small distance but still close enough for Eleanor to sense his presence. Sophie stayed on the other side, watching it all with her sharp eyes, as if she still couldn't fully believe the situation. As the movie started, Eleanor looked at the three kids who had literally overnight invaded her space and her life. Her once empty and cold home was now filled with something new, not just the sound of other people, but a feeling she had forgotten existed. During the movie, Eleanor observed the kids' reactions, Ben's wide-eyed fascination with the dinosaurs on the screen, Oliver's uncontrollable laughter at funny moments, and even Sophie, who gradually relaxed enough to allow herself to smile. At one point, Sophie looked at Eleanor and whispered, "Thank you." It was a simple word, yet it carried the weight of everything these children had been through, as well as the genuine gratitude for this moment of normalcy they were experiencing. "You're welcome," Eleanor replied, feeling that, in reality, they were the ones giving her something she never knew she needed. When the movie ended, Eleanor offered to help Sophie comb her hair, now clean but still full of tangles. Gently, she ran the comb through the girl's hair, being careful not to hurt her. "My mom used to do this," Sophie commented, closing her eyes. "Before we were without a home," Eleanor continued calmly combing. "She must have been a good mom." "She was," Sophie confirmed. She was just really tired and sad at the end. While detangling Sophie's hair, Eleanor simultaneously played peekaboo with Oliver, who was hiding behind the curtains, his feet sticking out as he giggled each time she pretended not to see him. Ben, for his part, had discovered a photography book on the shelf in the corner of the living room. Though he couldn't read much, he flipped through it, fascinated by photos of faraway places. That was when Eleanor realized something inside her was changing. The emptiness that had accompanied her for so long was being filled by something chaotic, terrifying and completely unpredictable, yet undeniably right. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor found herself doing things she never imagined, playing made-up games with ever-changing rules, listening to Ben's improvised stories about flying dinosaurs with ice cream dogs, and trying to answer Oliver's endless questions about how the overhead lights worked. It was exhausting, confusing, and completely outside her comfort zone. And yet she couldn't remember the last time she had felt so alive. When the sun began to set, casting golden rays through the apartment's large windows, Eleanor looked around. The previously immaculate living room was now scattered with pillows, new toys in random places, and 3 children who had transformed her world in less than 24 hours. Sophie caught her gaze from across the room, and for a brief moment, they shared a silent understanding, both navigating unfamiliar waters, both trying to figure out what came next. Eleanor didn't have any answers. She didn't know what tomorrow held, or what she should do in the long term. All she knew was that her home, for the first time ever, no longer felt empty. On the 3rd night with the children, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat on her bedroom balcony, gazing at the city lights, while her mind churned with conflicting thoughts. 3 days earlier, her life had been completely predictable. Work, empty social events, impulsive shopping, lonely nights. Now, her apartment had tiny socks on the floor, echoes of laughter in the hallways, and 3 sets of eyes looking at her with a mix of gratitude and caution. "What am I doing?" she murmured to herself. The question had lingered in her mind since she brought the children home. Initially, it seemed like a temporary solution, getting 3 kids off the streets for one night. But one night turned into 2, then 3, and Eleanor began to realize there was no clear plan. Should she contact the authorities, find some relative of the children, take them to a shelter? The last option made her stomach knot. She had once visited a shelter during a company charity event. She remembered the institutional atmosphere, the children's vacant stairs, the dorms with multiple beds. It was better than the streets, certainly, but Sophie, Ben, and Oliver would likely be separated by age and gender. The thought of separating the siblings, after everything they'd been through, felt too cruel. Her phone vibrated on the table beside her, interrupting her thoughts. Seeing her father's name on the screen, she hesitated before answering. She hadn't spoken to him since the children arrived. "Hello, Dad?" "Eleanor." Richard Harrington's voice was always formal, even with his own daughter. "I got an interesting call from your assistant today. Apparently, you cancelled 3 important meetings this week without explanation." Eleanor sighed. She had completely forgotten about her work, meetings, and responsibilities that had seemed so crucial just a few days earlier. "I had some unforeseen circumstances," she answered vaguely. "What kind of unforeseen circumstances justify abandoning your obligations to the company?" Eleanor hesitated. Her father wasn't known for his compassion or flexibility. "I'm helping some children," she finally said, a brief silence on the other end. "Children?" Richard's voice sounded puzzled. "What children?" "3 siblings, Sophie, Ben, and Oliver. They were living on the streets, Dad. The oldest is only 6. And where are they now?" "Here, in my apartment." Another silence, longer this time. "You brought homeless children into your home?" His tone was incredulous. "Have you lost your mind, Eleanor? Do you realize how many problems this could create?" "Kidnapping minors." "I didn't kidnap anyone," Eleanor interrupted, annoyed. "They were abandoned and hungry. No one was taking care of them." "Then take them to a shelter. There are systems, institutions to handle these situations. You can't just pick up kids off the street as if they were lost pets." His words hit her like a slap. Partly because they echoed her own doubts, partly because they highlighted how wide the gap was between her perspective and his. "They're not lost pets," she replied, keeping her voice low so as not to wake the children in the adjacent room. "They're 3 siblings who lost everything and are just trying to survive together." "Eleanor," her father's tone softened slightly, assuming that condescending note she despised. "I understand you're trying to help, but you're acting impulsively, as you always do. There are legal processes, custody issues. You could even be accused of kidnapping. I know there are complications. More than complications, unnecessary risks. Take these children to the proper authorities tomorrow. Get back to work. Resume your life." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. Her father was right about the legal risks. She had no rights over the children. Technically, she was keeping 3 minors without authorization. "I'll think about it," she finally answered. "There's nothing to think about. It's the only sensible solution." Richard paused. "Your mother always said you had too soft a heart. Admirable in some settings, but not when it conflicts with common sense." The mention of her mother, rare coming from him, made Eleanor swallow hard. "Good night, Dad," she said, ending the call before he could continue. Setting the phone aside, she got up and walked quietly to the room where the children slept. The door was slightly ajar, as always. A soft bedside lamp illuminated the scene inside. Sophie was sitting up in the large bed, an open children's book on her lap. Oliver slept soundly, using her lap as a pillow. Ben lay beside them, trying to stay awake as Sophie read in a soft voice, improvising a story based on the pictures since she couldn't read completely. And then the bunny found his family, who had been looking for him all along, Sophie narrated, looking at the illustrations. They were very happy because they were all together again. Eleanor stood at the door, invisible to the children. She watched how Sophie absent-mindedly stroked Oliver's hair while telling the story, how Ben fought sleep to hear every word. Something inside Eleanor broke and healed at the same time. How could she separate them? How could she send them into a system that would treat them like cases, numbers, problems to be solved? Sophie would lose her protective role. Ben would lose the comfort of his sister's presence. Oliver would wake up in a strange place without his siblings. In that moment, Eleanor knew she couldn't do it, not yet. She needed time to find a better solution. She returned to her room, determined to find out what could be done legally. If there was a way to help the children without separating them, she would find it. The next morning, Eleanor woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. For a moment, she felt disoriented. Her apartment had never been filled with laughter before. Following the sound, she found a surprising scene. Sophie was trying to make pancakes. Flour covered much of the countertop, and Oliver had a white smudge on his nose. Ben held an egg very carefully, as if it were made of crystal. "Good morning," Eleanor said, entering the kitchen. All 3 kids froze, as if they'd been caught doing something wrong. "Sorry," Sophie said quickly. We wanted to make breakfast for you to say thanks. But it's harder than it looks. Eleanor felt a wave of tenderness. That's a wonderful surprise. Can we finish them together? Relief was evident on the children's faces. Oliver ran over and hugged her legs with flour-covered hands, leaving white marks on her pajama pants. "I'm helping," he declared proudly. "I can see that," Eleanor laughed, picking him up despite the flour. "You're all great helpers." For the next hour, Eleanor taught the children how to make pancakes, something she hadn't done since her teens, when her mother was still alive. Sophie was meticulous, following every step intently. Ben turned out to be surprisingly good at cracking eggs without getting shells in the batter. And Oliver was excellent at licking the spoon when no one was watching. The pancakes were far from perfect. Some were burnt, others undercooked, but they ate them all enthusiastically, smothered with maple syrup and banana slices. "This is better than a restaurant," Ben declared after his third pancake, face covered in syrup. "Much better," Eleanor agreed, surprisingly realizing she truly felt that way. After breakfast, as they cleaned the kitchen together, Eleanor realized she really was learning how to care for them, not just by providing material things, but by truly interacting, teaching, and learning from them. The rest of the day went by in a series of small, meaningful moments. Eleanor listened patiently as Ben narrated a complicated story about a dinosaur living on the moon with a pet dog inexplicably made of ice cream. "Didn't the dog melt?" she asked, genuinely invested in the story's logic. Ben thought for a moment, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Just a little bit around the edges," he finally decided. "But the dinosaur licked it so it wouldn't get worse." Eleanor laughed, charmed by the boy's imagination. With Oliver, she discovered the simple joy of playing hide-and-seek. The apartment, which once felt too big and empty, now offered countless hiding spots. Oliver wasn't particularly good at the game. He usually only hid his head, leaving the rest of his body completely visible, or giggled so loudly that it gave him away immediately. But his laughter when found was contagious. "Again," he insisted each round, running off to hide before Eleanor even began counting. Even Sophie, always serious and watchful, began to relax. Eleanor caught her smiling as she watched her brothers play, a genuine smile that softened her features, reminding everyone that despite everything, she was still just a child, not a miniature adult. That afternoon, while the children rested watching cartoons, Eleanor made a few discreet phone calls to legal consultants. The answers were not encouraging. Without any documentation or familial relationship, her options were limited. The official route would indeed involve reporting the children to the authorities. But as she watched the three siblings curled up on the sofa, giggling at something silly on TV, Eleanor felt a surge of determination. She would find a way. She had money, connections, resources. There had to be a way to help them without tearing apart the only stable bond they had, their bond with each other. That evening, as they prepared a simple dinner together, Eleanor noticed something she hadn't before: the noise. Her previously museum-quiet apartment was now full of life. The clatter of dishes, laughter, questions from curious little minds, even small sibling spats all blending together into a symphony that finally made the place feel like a home. "Eleanor," Sophie said while they set the table, "how long are we staying here?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. The children hadn't asked about their situation until now, perhaps for fear of breaking the magic spell or reminding themselves it was temporary. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly, kneeling down so she was at the girl's eye level. "But I'm trying to figure out a way for you to stay together and safe." Sophie nodded, taking it in. "It's nice here," she said simply. "Ben doesn't have nightmares, and Oliver doesn't go hungry." The simple words carried immense weight. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. "It's nice for me too," she admitted. "Really nice." And it was true. Despite her doubts, the legal complications, and her father's disapproval, there was something undeniably right about it all. For the first time in years, maybe since her mother's death, Eleanor felt her life had a purpose, that what she did genuinely mattered to someone else. Watching the children chatter excitedly about tomorrow's plans, Eleanor made a silent decision. She would fight for them. She didn't know exactly how, but she'd find a way. Her father was wrong. This wasn't impulsiveness or having too soft a heart. It was possibly the first truly important decision she'd made in her adult life. A week had passed since Eleanor brought the children into her home, a week that completely transformed her routine, her apartment, and, as she was beginning to see, her own life. Days now had a new structure, waking up early to the sound of small footsteps in the hallway, making breakfast with Sophie's help, taking the kids to a nearby park, reading them bedtime stories. But with this new routine came a growing awareness that she needed to make a decision that weighed more heavily each day. Sitting in her home office while the children watched a movie in the living room, Eleanor stared at her computer screen, where she'd listed all possible options. None of them seemed ideal. Option 1. Contact social services. Following the standard procedure would mean the children would be taken in for evaluation and then placed in temporary care while searching for relatives. The siblings would likely be separated because of their ages and genders. The thought of it made her stomach turn. Option 2. Search for any relatives. But how? Sophie didn't know her mother's full last name, only that it was Melissa. They had no papers, no previous address, nothing that could help track down any family members. Option 3. Seek temporary custody. Would that even be possible? Eleanor had no qualifications apart from her money and good intentions. She'd never cared for kids before, had no references, and how they ended up with her would raise serious questions. Then there was her job. It had been a week since she essentially abandoned her responsibilities at the company. Her father had called twice more, each time more irritated about her absence. Her assistant emailed daily, asking for decisions, approvals, feedback from business partners. "What am I doing?" she muttered to herself, rubbing her face with both hands. A soft sound at the door made her look up. Sophie was standing there, observing her with those sharp eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Hi," Eleanor said, quickly closing her laptop. "Is the movie over?" Sophie shook her head. "I came to see if you were okay. You looked sad." Eleanor smiled, touched by the girl's empathy. "I'm not sad. I'm just thinking about some complicated things." Sophie entered the office, glancing around with curiosity. It was the only room she hadn't fully explored. The walls featured diplomas, photos of Eleanor at corporate events, and industry awards. "Is it about us?" Sophie asked directly, pointing to the closed laptop. "Were you deciding what to do with us?" The frankness of the question surprised Eleanor. She could have denied it, offered some excuse about work, but something told her Sophie deserved honesty. "Yes," she admitted. "I'm trying to figure out what's best for you three." Sophie nodded, as if she'd already suspected that. "We're going to have to leave, aren't we?" The simple question carried so much weight that Eleanor felt like something was pressing on her chest. She saw the fear in the girl's eyes, carefully concealed but undeniably there. "I don't know yet," Eleanor answered, choosing the truth. "There are rules about who can take care of children. It's not as simple as I'd like." Sophie looked down at her feet, swaying slightly. "Ben's happy here. He hasn't had a real room since we were babies, and Oliver doesn't wake up crying from hunger." She looked up at Eleanor. "And I like not having to be the mum all the time." The girl's simple words struck Eleanor deeply. Of course Sophie, at only 6A, must be exhausted from carrying the responsibility for her younger brothers, a burden that should never have been hers. "Come here," Eleanor said, opening her arms. To her surprise, Sophie accepted the invitation and came over, allowing herself to be hugged. It was the first time she initiated that kind of physical contact without hesitation. "I'm doing my best to keep you together," Eleanor promised, feeling the child's small body tense in her arms. "And as long as it depends on me, you're not going back to the streets. Ever again." Sophie didn't reply, but Eleanor felt her relax slightly in the embrace, as if for the first time letting herself trust a little of what was being offered. "Ben wants to show you his drawing," Sophie finally said, pulling away. "Will you come see it?" "Sure," Eleanor said, standing up. "I love his drawings." As she followed Sophie back to the living room, Eleanor felt a tightness in her chest she couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just about the children's future. It was something more personal, more profound. Fear. Fear of returning to her old life, lonely and empty, with no real purpose. For the first time in many years, Eleanor admitted she was afraid of being alone again. The next morning, while the children were still asleep, Eleanor decided to try a different approach. She called a college friend who had become a family law attorney. "Is there any procedure that would allow me to keep temporary custody of them while we figure out a permanent solution?" she asked, after explaining the situation and omitting the fact that the kids had already been with her for a week. The answer was not encouraging. "Eleanor, what you're describing is extremely complicated legally," her friend explained. "There's no family relationship, no documents, and the way you found them, honestly, protocol dictates you report them to the authorities immediately." "What if I wanted permanent custody?" Eleanor asked, surprising even herself with the question. A moment of silence on the other end. "You mean adoption, 3 children at once?" "Eleanor, you don't have a track record with children, you're single and you work full-time. The court would consider that highly unlikely." Eleanor felt the frustration build. "So the system would rather split up 3 siblings who have already lost everything than keep them with someone who can provide financial and emotional stability." "It's not that simple," her friend replied, voice softening. "The system prioritizes children's safety. And from their perspective, a single woman with no childcare experience who suddenly wants to adopt 3 daughters raises a lot of red flags." After hanging up, Eleanor stared at the wall, feeling cornered. The law, which should protect vulnerable children, seemed to be working against Sophie, Ben, and Oliver's best interests. "Eleanor!" A sleepy voice made her turn. Ben stood at the kitchen door, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking out in all directions. "Is there cereal?" Eleanor forced a smile, pushing her worries aside. "Of course. Let's get breakfast ready while your siblings wake up." Ben trudged over, still drowsy, and to Eleanor's surprise, simply lifted his arms, silently asking to be picked up. Without hesitation, she lifted him, feeling the warmth of his body still cozy from sleep. "I dreamed about a dog," he said while Eleanor carried him over to grab cereal. "Could we get a dog here?" The innocent question, making plans for a future Eleanor couldn't guarantee, made her heart squeeze. "We'll see," she replied softly. "Dogs can be a lot of work." "I can help," Ben offered seriously. "I know how to feed them and pet them." Eleanor smiled, setting him on a chair. "I'm sure you do." While preparing breakfast, Eleanor watched Ben doodle on the table with his fingers, lost in childish thoughts. How would she break this child's trust? How would she explain that, despite all the affection they'd developed, they might have to go somewhere else with strangers? Later that day, as she helped Sophie organize her new toys in the bedroom, Eleanor found herself immersed in memories of her own childhood. The girl wanted to keep everything nice and tidy, so we don't lose anything, revealing how precious these small items were to her. "When I was little, I also liked to keep my things organized," Eleanor commented, carefully folding a small t-shirt. "Were you afraid they might disappear?" Sophie asked, lining up a row of colorful books on a low shelf. Eleanor paused. "Not exactly. I think it was more about pleasing my dad. He didn't like mess." "Was your dad mean?" Eleanor thought about it. Richard Harrington wasn't cruel or violent, just absent, distant, too focused on the company to notice his lonely daughter. Not mean, just very busy. Eleanor picked up a teddy bear, adjusting its bow. "My mom died when I was 8. After that, he buried himself even more in work." Sophie stopped what she was doing, looking at Eleanor with a mix of surprise and understanding, the recognition of shared loss. What was she like? Your mum. Eleanor smiled, sweet memories surfacing. She was beautiful, kind. She loved to read me a story every night, no matter how late she got home from work. Like you do. The simple comparison took Eleanor by surprise. Like me. Sophie nodded, continuing to arrange the books. You read to us every night too. Eleanor fell silent, realizing she'd never made that connection, that by reading to these children, she was replicating the gesture she'd loved most from her own mother. After she was gone, Eleanor continued, feeling a strange need to share more with Sophie. Everything changed. My dad hired nannies, but it wasn't the same. You were alone, Sophie observed, not as a question but as a statement. Yes, Eleanor admitted, very alone. Looking at Sophie now, so small, so serious, so determined to protect her brothers, Eleanor saw a reflection of herself. Not in the exact circumstances, but in the premature loneliness, the forced maturity, the strength born of necessity. You're very brave, you know, Eleanor said softly, touching Sophie's hair. Taking care of your brothers the way you do, that takes a lot of courage. Sophie shrugged, a gesture Eleanor recognized as her way of handling compliments or difficult emotions. No one else was there to look after them, she replied simply. Still, many children your age couldn't do what you did. Sophie looked at Eleanor, her eyes revealing a maturity no 6-year-old should have. You would do it too, she said confidently, if you had little brothers. The observation struck Eleanor profoundly. Yes, she probably would have done the same. After her mother died, she became self-sufficient, emotionally taking care of herself while her father buried himself in work. It wasn't so different from what Sophie had done, just in less extreme circumstances. I guess so, Eleanor agreed. We're similar in that way. A small smile appeared on Sophie's face, one of those rare smiles that completely transformed her, reminding everyone she was still just a child. And that night, after the children fell asleep, Eleanor went back to her office, determined to find a solution. If the system offered no clear path, she would create one. She opened her laptop and began researching lawyers who specialized in complex family and adoption cases. She found some promising leads, professionals experienced in unconventional situations who had found creative solutions within the law. Her phone rang, interrupting her search. It was her father again. Eleanor, this has gone on long enough, he said bluntly. Your assistant told me you still haven't responded about the contract with the Italian suppliers. The meeting was supposed to happen yesterday. I'm dealing with a complicated situation here, Dad, Eleanor said, keeping her voice low so as not to wake the children. Those street children are still with you. His incredulity annoyed her deeply. Yes, they are, and they have names, Sophie, Ben, and Oliver. Eleanor, this has gone too far. If you truly care about these children, do the legal thing. Contact the authorities, so they can be split up and placed in different shelters or worse, put back on the streets when there's no more space. Eleanor felt her anger rise. I'm not letting that happen. Richard sighed heavily. What exactly are you planning to do? Adopt them? Become an instant mother to 3 kids? Ayosu, who never showed any interest in having a family. The words hit a sore spot. It was true Eleanor had never talked about kids. Her life had revolved around her career, travels, expensive shopping sprees, a carefully constructed existence to mask a void she rarely admitted existed. People change, she replied simply. Yes, people change. But not overnight, not like this. Her father's voice softened a bit. Eleanor, I'm worried about you. This isn't an impulse you can satisfy by buying something expensive. These are human lives. Children need stability, structure, knowledge you simply don't have. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. He was right about one thing. She had no experience. She was learning day by day, making mistakes, improvising. I know it's not ideal, she admitted, but they're better off here than on the streets or split up in different shelters. Temporarily, maybe, but long term, What happens when you tire of this novelty? When raising 3 traumatized kids becomes overwhelming? What about your job? Your life? Have you thought about all that? Eleanor didn't answer right away. Of course she'd thought about it. Those doubts haunted her in quiet moments when the children slept. Was she truly prepared for long-term responsibility? Could she provide not just material comfort, but everything else they needed emotionally? I'm considering all of that, she finally said. But I'm also considering what will happen to them if I hand them over to the system. Her father remained silent for a moment. I just don't want you making an impulsive decision you'll regret. That wouldn't be fair to you or the children. After hanging up, Eleanor tried to resume her online searches but couldn't focus. His words echoed in her mind, mingling with her own doubts. She stood and walked quietly to the children's bedroom. The door was ajar as usual, allowing a soft glow from the hallway to illuminate 3 small sleeping figures on the big bed. Oliver had kicked the covers away, his small arms dramatically thrown above his head. Ben slept curled in a fetal position, as if still trying to protect himself even in his dreams. Sophie, as always, was positioned so that she could wake quickly if needed, one arm protectively draped over Oliver, her body slightly turned toward the door. Looking at them now, Eleanor's doubts felt both more intense and less relevant. Yes, a million reasons existed why this might not work. Yes, she was utterly unprepared for the responsibility. Yes, her life would never be the same. But gazing at those 3 children sleeping safely, she knew she couldn't just give up. She would find a solution, she had to, because the thought of returning to her old life, that empty, lonely existence, now felt unbearable. Eleanor gently closed the door and headed back to her office, determined to keep searching for options. Tomorrow, she would contact the attorneys she'd found. She'd hire the best, no matter the cost. She'd use every resource she had to keep these 3 siblings together and be, if possible, with her. The fear of being alone again was real and deep. But stronger than that was her fear of failing 3 children who, against all odds, had begun to trust her. At 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after Eleanor first encountered the children, the doorbell rang. She was teaching Sophie how to make pancakes in the kitchen, while Ben and Oliver played with building blocks in the living room. "I'll get it," Eleanor called, wiping her hands on the apron she was wearing. "Sophie, keep an eye on the batter, okay? I'll be right back." Opening the door, Eleanor found herself face to face with 2 well-dressed women wearing serious expressions and carrying folders. "Miss Harrington?" asked the older one, a middle-aged woman with grey hair in a tight bun. "My name is Diane Parker, from the Department of Social Services. This is my colleague, Rebecca Lewis." Eleanor felt her heart race. How had they found out? Who reported her? "May we come in?" Diane continued, her tone polite but firm. "We received an anonymous tip about 3 children in your care without proper legal documentation." Anonymous. Eleanor knew exactly who had made the report, her father, undoubtedly thinking he was acting in her best interest. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile and trying to stay calm. "Please, come in." The 2 women followed Eleanor into the living room, where Ben and Oliver immediately stopped playing, watching the strangers warily. Ben moved closer to his younger brother. "Hello, boys," Rebecca greeted, kneeling down to their level. "What are your names?" Ben looked at Eleanor, as if asking permission to speak. "It's okay," she assured him, though she wasn't even sure herself. "They just want to talk." "I'm Ben," the boy said shyly. "I'm 4. "And I'm Oliver," the youngest declared happily, apparently not sensing the tension in the room. "I'm 3. Eleanor noticed Sophie standing in the kitchen doorway, completely still, her face pale. She had a 6th sense for trouble and clearly understood something was off. "Sophie," Eleanor called gently, "could you come here for a moment? These ladies are from social services and want to talk to us." Sophie walked over slowly, her eyes never leaving the faces of the 2 women, analyzing them with the keen perception of someone much older than 6. "Hi, Sophie," said Diane, her professional tone softening a bit. "How old are you?" "6, Sophie answered, positioning herself protectively between the visitors and her brothers. "I'll be 7 eventually." "Miss Harrington, could we speak in private?" Diane asked. "Rebecca can stay here with the children for a few minutes." Eleanor hesitated, seeing the subtle panic in Sophie's face. "The kids will be fine right here with us." "We can talk," Diane nodded, adjusting to the situation. "All right, Miss Harrington, we understand these children have been with you for about 2 weeks. Is that correct?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, sitting on the sofa and gesturing for the social workers to do the same. Sophie immediately positioned herself beside Eleanor, while Ben and Oliver remained on the rug with their blocks, now playing quietly. "What exactly is your relationship to these children?" That was the question Eleanor dreaded most. There was no simple answer that wouldn't sound incriminating. "I found them alone, without adult supervision," she explained, opting for honesty. "Sophie told me their father abandoned them years ago, and their mother left one day and never came back." "And your first action was to bring them to your home?" Diane asked, jotting notes, "instead of contacting the authorities." Eleanor felt defensive. "My first action was to feed them and give them a safe place to sleep. They were hungry, scared, alone." "I understand your concern, Miss Harrington," Rebecca said, her voice gentler than her colleagues. "But there are specific protocols for such cases. Keeping children without legal documentation for 2 weeks is technically a serious violation." "A violation?" Eleanor repeated, feeling her blood pressure rise. "Getting 3 starving kids off the street is a violation." "Eleanor," Sophie whispered, tugging on her sleeve. Hearing her use Eleanor's first name, something she rarely did, brought Eleanor back to reality. The kids were listening. She had to stay calm. "I'm sorry," she said, taking a deep breath. "I realize there are procedures. I'm willing to do anything legally required to fix the children's situation." Diane studied Eleanor with a look that combined skepticism and professional curiosity. "So you're saying you want to start a formal custody process, or adoption?" "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I want to keep all 3 of them together, with me." "They've been through enough abandonment." Rebecca and Diane exchanged a meaningful glance. "Miss Harrington," Diane began in a more formal tone, "I need to be clear. The process you're suggesting is extremely complex and, frankly, unlikely to be approved under these circumstances." "Why?" "Several factors. Your lack of childcare experience, the fact that you're single with a demanding career, the unusual way the children came into your care. Also, adoptions generally prioritize couples, and adopting siblings together is even more challenging." Eleanor sensed Sophie tense up beside her, clearly absorbing every word. "What happens to them now?" Eleanor asked, fearing the answer. "We'll need to arrange medical and psychological evaluations," Rebecca explained. "Then they'll be placed in temporary accommodations while we investigate whether they have any relatives who can take responsibility." "Together?" Eleanor pressed. "Will they remain together?" Another glance passed between the social workers, one Eleanor really didn't like. "We'll do our best," Diane said, which clearly meant no guarantees. "No." Sophie's small but firm voice startled everyone. "We're not going to be separated." Diane looked at the girl with what seemed to be genuine compassion. "Sophie, I understand your concern, but—" "You don't understand," Sophie interrupted, her voice trembling slightly despite its determined tone. "I promised Mom I'd look after them. We always stay together. Always." Eleanor put a protective arm around Sophie's shoulders. "Is there any way I can get temporary custody while the formal process is reviewed? Some exception or special procedure?" Diane hesitated. "There are provisions for temporary guardianship in exceptional cases, but typically those apply to close relatives or people who already had a prior relationship with the children." "I have resources," Eleanor insisted. "I can provide everything they need: school, medical care, counseling. I've already consulted specialized attorneys. Financial resources are important, Yes, Rebecca conceded. But the court considers many other factors when determining a child's well-being. The discussion went on for over an hour. Eleanor answered numerous questions about her life, routine, and future plans. The social workers interviewed Sophie briefly, asking how Eleanor treated them, if they were happy, if they missed anything. Sophie, with her wisdom beyond her years, answered carefully, emphasizing how well Eleanor cared for them, how they had food, clean clothes, and felt safe for the first time in a long while. By the time the social workers finally got up to leave, Diane handed Eleanor a card. "We'll contact you within 48 hours about the next steps. Please do not leave town with the children. That would complicate matters further." Eleanor nodded, walking them to the door. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep these siblings together." After closing it, she turned to see Sophie standing in the middle of the living room, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. "They're going to take us, aren't they?" the girl asked. Eleanor knelt in front of her, taking her small hands. "I'm going to do everything I can to stop that. But they can, right? They can just come and take us away." The honesty of her question demanded an honest answer. "Yes, legally they can, but I won't let that happen without a fight, Sophie." Ben approached, sensing the tension. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, honey," Eleanor said quickly. "You didn't do anything wrong. It's just that grown-up rules are sometimes complicated." Oliver, picking up on the heavy mood, walked over to Eleanor and climbed into her lap, a gesture of trust that made her heart tighten. How could she bear to see them taken away? Later that day, as the children watched a movie in the living room, Eleanor received the call she'd been expecting. It was her father. "So, the social workers finally showed up," he said bluntly. "It was necessary, Eleanor." "You were the one who reported it, weren't you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes, I did. Because, contrary to what you might think, I care about your well-being." Eleanor closed her eyes, controlling her anger. "They might separate the siblings, Dad. Do you realize what that would do to them? It's better for them to be in a system designed to help than in a legally dubious situation with someone untrained in childcare." "I'm doing just fine," Eleanor argued. "They're happy here, they're safe." "For now," Richard retorted, "but what about when the novelty wears off? When you realize how hard it truly is to raise 3 traumatized children? When your professional obligations can't be postponed anymore?" The implicit accusation that she was just playing house, that her interest in the children was fleeting, wounded Eleanor deeply, partly because it echoed her own secret doubts. "It's not a phase," she replied firmly. "It's not a whim. Eleanor, I understand you want to help. You've always had a soft heart, like your mother." The rare mention of her mother took Eleanor by surprise, but there are better ways to help these kids without turning your life upside down. "Like what?" "I can make some calls," Richard offered. "I know influential people in various institutions. We can ensure the kids stay together in a good foster home. You can even visit them if you want, donate for their care. But you'd be able to return to your normal life. Your normal life." The words echoed in Eleanor's mind. Her life before the children. The silent, empty apartment. Days filled with meaningless meetings and mindless shopping. The lonely nights when the emptiness inside felt insurmountable. "I don't want to go back to my normal life," Eleanor said, realizing it fully as she spoke. "I don't want to be who I was." "Eleanor?" "No, Dad, listen. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that truly matters, something that makes a difference in someone else's life besides my own." Richard sighed heavily. "This isn't about you feeling good about yourself. It's about what's best for these children." "And who decides what's best for them?" Eleanor shot back. "An overburdened system that will probably split them up. Strangers who don't understand the trauma they've been through. Or someone who genuinely cares about them, who has the resources to give them everything they need." "Eleanor?" "I'm going to fight for them, Dad," she interrupted, her determination growing with every word. "I'll hire the best lawyers. I'll prove I'm capable. And if you really care about me, you'll support me instead of forcing me to return to a life that I now realize never made me truly happy." A long silence followed. When Richard finally spoke, his voice sounded resigned. "You're as stubborn as your mother was, you know?" Eleanor smiled slightly despite everything. "Thank you. That wasn't exactly a compliment, but there was a touch of humor in his voice. What do you need from me?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "If you're truly determined to go down this path, what resources do you need? Contacts, references? I have friends in the judicial system." Eleanor felt an unexpected wave of emotion. It was the closest her father had come to offering unconditional support in, well, her entire adult life. "That would mean a lot," she admitted. "I need to prove I can offer long-term stability to the kids." "I'll see what I can do," Richard promised. "But Eleanor, be absolutely sure. Make sure this is truly what you want." "I am sure, Dad," she said without hesitation. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." After hanging up, she remained seated for a moment, absorbing their conversation. She felt oddly light, as if she had finally put into words something her heart had known for days. She didn't want to go back to her old life. She didn't want to return to the person she used to be, filling emptiness with things, when what she truly needed was purpose, connection, love. Light footsteps made her look up. Sophie stood at the door, her eyes indicating she'd overheard at least part of the conversation. "Are you really going to fight for us?" the girl asked in a small voice. Eleanor opened her arms, and to her surprise, Sophie ran into them without hesitation. "With everything I have," Eleanor promised, hugging her tight. "I'm scared," Sophie whispered against her shoulder. "I am too," Eleanor admitted. "But sometimes the things that scare us the most are the ones we need to face." Sophie nodded, understanding the truth in those words with a wisdom beyond her years. "If we stay together, it'll be okay." Eleanor wasn't sure if Sophie was just referring to herself and her brothers, or including Eleanor in that together. She chose to believe the latter. "Yes," she agreed, kissing the top of Sophie's head. "Together." Holding the child in her arms, Eleanor felt a surge of determination. The social workers would be back in 2 days. She didn't have much time to prepare her case, start the legal processes, and prove she was fit to care for these children. But she had something no court, no system could easily ignore. The genuine love that had grown between her and the 3 siblings, an unexpected love that had transformed not only their lives, but her own. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor Harrington knew exactly what her purpose was, and she would fight with all her strength to protect it. Attorney Martin Wells's office occupied the entire 30th floor of a building in the city's financial district. Eleanor stared at the panoramic view while she waited, clutching a folder of documents. Inside were everything she'd gathered about the children, Ben's drawings, photos of the moments they had shared, notes on their food preferences, sleep routines, and the small details she'd learned about each of them over the past weeks. "Miss Harrington," came Martin's deep voice as he entered the conference room. "Thank you for coming on short notice." Eleanor stood to greet him, trying to conceal her nerves. Martin Wells had a reputation for being the best family law attorney in the city, and the most expensive. Her father had arranged the consultation, a small sign of support that still surprised her. "Your father explained the situation in quite some detail," Martin said, sitting across from her. "But I'd like to hear it from you, no filters." Eleanor took a deep breath and recounted everything. The moment she met Sophie in the busy shopping district, the decision to take the children to dinner, her inability to abandon them to the streets, the weeks they'd spent together, and the social worker's visit. Martin listened carefully, occasionally jotting down notes, his face remaining professionally neutral. "I'll be frank," he said once she finished. "Legally, we're heading into a complicated battle. You've essentially taken custody of 3 minors without following proper legal protocols." "I know how it sounds," Eleanor answered, frustration evident in her voice. "But what was I supposed to do? Leave them on the street? Hand them over to a system that would split them up?" Martin raised a calming hand. I'm not judging your actions. I'm just laying out the legal facts so we know where we stand. He opened a folder and pulled out several documents. We'll start by filing a formal request for temporary custody, along with a petition for permanent custody. Normally, that request comes from close relatives, so we'll need to build an exceptionally strong case. He slid a document toward her. This is an emergency petition we should submit tomorrow. It argues that abruptly removing the children from their current environment would be traumatic and detrimental to their well-being. Eleanor nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. At the same time, Martin continued, we have to prove your capability as their guardian. That will include psychological evaluations for you and the children, home inspections, proof of financial stability, and detailed plans on how you intend to balance work and parenting. For the next 40 minutes, Martin laid out the legal strategy, the documents needed, the testimonies required, and the likely timeline. I won't lie, he concluded. It'll be a lengthy, emotionally draining process, but if you're truly committed, we have a chance. Eleanor looked back at him with determination. I've never been more committed to anything in my life. And the following weeks turned into a marathon of paperwork and emotional upheaval. Eleanor split her time between meetings with lawyers, preparing documents, and, of course, caring for the 3 children, who continued to adjust to their new life. Sophie had begun literacy lessons with a private tutor and absorbed knowledge like a thirsty sponge. Ben finally slept through the night without nightmares, his expression more relaxed each day. Oliver, always the most adaptable, thrived on the steady attention, developing a surprisingly large vocabulary for a 3-year-old. Eleanor converted one of her extra rooms into a work-play area, her desk in one corner and a space for toys in another, so she could oversee the children while taking conference calls and reviewing contracts. Her assistant, initially shocked by her boss's radical life change, quickly became an invaluable ally, reorganizing Eleanor's schedule to allow as much remote work as possible. The first preliminary hearing was set for the following week. Eleanor felt its approach like a storm cloud looming on the horizon. The social workers had visited twice more, and although they seemed reasonably satisfied with what they observed, they continued reminding her that the system's main priority was family reunification if possible, or placement with relatives. That night, after dinner, while the children got ready for bed, Eleanor sat in her living room surrounded by a stack of documents Martin had sent over. They were detailed preparations for her testimony, questions she'd be asked, objections that might arise, weaknesses that needed to be addressed proactively. Eleanor. She looked up to find Sophie standing in the doorway, already in pajamas, clutching a book. Hey, sweetie, did you brush your teeth? Sophie nodded, stepping closer. Can I read with you a bit before bed? Eleanor smiled, setting the documents aside. Of course you can. The girl climbed onto the couch and settled beside Eleanor, opening the storybook they'd bought the previous week. Over the past few days, Sophie had been trying to read small sections on her own, mixing actual reading with memorized passages Eleanor had read to her. The little fox, Sophie began slowly, her finger tracing each word. I was lost in the big forest. Eleanor watched with pride as Sophie focused on reading. In just a few weeks, she'd made remarkable progress. It was as though, finally free from the constant worry of basic survival, her mind could fully embrace learning. Ben peeked into the room, followed by Oliver, both also in pajamas. We want to hear too, Ben said, climbing onto the couch on Eleanor's other side. Oliver, with no formality at all, simply crawled into her lap, as if that were the most natural place for him. The comforting weight of the child against her chest sent a wave of warmth through Eleanor's body. Sophie continued reading, now for a bigger audience and occasionally asking for help with tougher words. By the end of the story, about a little fox who got lost but eventually found a new family of different animals that took her in, Ben sighed happily. I like it when stories have happy endings, he remarked. Me too, Eleanor agreed, giving him a gentle squeeze. A comfortable silence fell over them, the kind that only exists when people feel truly at ease together. "Eleanor," Sophie said suddenly in a serious tone, "are we a family now?" The question was so direct and simple that Eleanor felt a knot in her throat. "What do you think?" she asked gently. Sophie considered it for a moment, looking at her brothers. "I think so. Because families don't have to be all the same, right? Like in the Fox story." "That's true," Eleanor agreed, feeling her eyes get misty. "A family is about people who care for each other, who look after each other. Like us," Ben added with childlike certainty. "Like us," Eleanor repeated softly. Sophie closed the book and turned to Eleanor, her large eyes revealing a rare vulnerability. "You're not going to leave us too, are you?" she whispered. The question struck Eleanor like a punch to the gut. This child, who had been abandoned so many times, feared being left again. "No," Eleanor answered firmly, pulling Sophie close. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." As she hugged all three children, Eleanor felt a deeper certainty settle within her. She never wanted to be alone again. She never wanted them to be alone again. Somehow, in a way she could never have foreseen a month ago, they had become a family. The phone rang at 7:38 the next morning, waking Eleanor from a deep sleep. She fumbled on the bedside table, trying not to disturb Oliver, who had come into her bed during the night after a nightmare. "Hello?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Miss Harrington, this is Martin Wells." Her lawyer's tense tone immediately snapped her awake. "Martin, what's going on?" "I got a call from the social services team about half an hour ago. There's a situation you need to be aware of." Eleanor sat up, her heart pounding. "What kind of situation?" There was a brief pause on the line. "They've located the children's mother." The world seemed to freeze around Eleanor. "What do you mean? I thought she abandoned them, disappeared months ago." Apparently that wasn't the case. She was admitted to the city hospital after a severe accident on the day she left home. She was hit by a car on her way to a job interview. She was in a coma for weeks, and when she woke up, she had amnesia. Without ID, the hospital had no way to notify anyone. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Are they sure it's her? Could it be a mistake? All the records match. Name, description of the children, dates. It's her, Eleanor, and her memory is returning. She started asking for her kids, so the hospital contacted social services. Eleanor looked at Oliver, still sleeping peacefully beside her, oblivious to the storm unfolding. How could this be happening? How Kesey, just when she'd begun forming a real bond with the kids, finally finding purpose, finally feeling she had a family, their mother reappeared. What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely recognizable. "Diane Parker, the social worker, will be contacting you today. They're going to want a supervised visit between the children and their mother as soon as possible." Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to process. They can just take them back to her after everything. "Not immediately," Martin clarified, a gentle note in his voice. "They'll evaluate her condition. But in the long run, yes, family reunification is almost always the system's primary goal." After hanging up, Eleanor sat on her bed, watching Oliver sleep. The reality sank in. The children weren't orphaned or abandoned. They had a mother who hadn't chosen to leave them and who now wanted them back. Her phone rang again. Diane Parker, the social worker. As Martin predicted, she wanted to schedule a supervised meeting the next day. "What's her condition?" Eleanor managed to ask, keeping her voice steady. Still recovering physically, but emotionally desperate to see her children. She didn't remember them at first, but once her memory returned, she's been frantic to find them. "Does she know they're with me?" "Yes. And she's grateful you've taken care of them. But of course she wants to reconnect." "Of course." The word echoed in Eleanor's mind. Naturally, a mother would want her children back. It was the normal course of life, So why did she feel like the ground was crumbling under her feet? When would the visit be? Eleanor asked, forcing herself to focus on practical details. Tomorrow afternoon, if possible, at the hospital, supervised. Tomorrow. So soon. So real. After the call ended, Eleanor walked to the window, watching the city start its day. How would she tell the children? Sophie believed her mother would never return. She had accepted it as fact. Ben and Oliver had adapted to this new reality, with Eleanor as their caregiver. A small movement caught her eye. Sophie stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her. "Did something bad happen?" the girl asked, always perceptive. Eleanor took a deep breath. They deserved to know the truth. "It's not exactly bad, Sophie. It's unexpected news. Let's wake your brothers, and I'll explain it all together, okay?" Minutes later, with the three kids gathered in the kitchen as Eleanor made breakfast, she tried to find the right words. "Remember how we said life can bring surprises sometimes?" The kids nodded, watching her curiously. "Well, I got some very surprising news today." Eleanor took a deep breath. "It's about your mom." Sophie dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter. "They found her. She's alive at a hospital here in the city." Sophie stared at Eleanor, wide-eyed, as if she didn't understand. Ben stopped chewing his cereal, confused. Only Oliver kept eating happily, too young to grasp the gravity of the moment. "But she left," Sophie finally said, her voice barely audible. "Not by choice, sweetheart. She had a serious accident the day she went looking for work. She got hurt badly and couldn't remember anything for a long time. When her memory came back, the first thing she wanted was to find you." Sophie blinked several times, as if trying to absorb the news. "She didn't leave us on purpose." "No, Sophie, she wanted to come back, but she couldn't." Ben looked from Eleanor to Sophie, trying to gauge their reactions. "Are we gonna see her?" "Yes," Eleanor said, feeling a knot in her throat. "Tomorrow we're going to the hospital to see her again." Sophie was oddly quiet, her small face reflecting a swirl of emotions: hope, confusion, fear. "Will she remember us?" she finally asked, voice trembling slightly. Eleanor felt her own heart clench. It was a question impossible to answer with certainty. "We'll find out together," she said sincerely, reaching for Sophie's hand. "We'll face this together, the same way we've handled everything else." The municipal hospital smelled of antiseptic and medicine, making Eleanor's stomach churn. Or maybe it was just nerves about what was about to happen. Sophie, usually so talkative recently, was completely silent, gripping Eleanor's hand tightly. Ben stayed pressed against her other side, while Oliver sat on her hip, fiddling with the zipper on her jacket, oblivious to the tension. Diane, the social worker, waited for them in the lobby, along with a child psychologist assigned to help with the reunification process. "Ready?" Diane asked gently. Eleanor looked at Sophie, who took a deep breath and gave the faintest nod. "We are," she answered for all of them. They walked down the white corridors to room 418. Diane knocked softly before opening the door a crack. "Melissa, they're here." Eleanor felt Sophie squeeze her hand even harder. Ben half hid behind her. Only Oliver, still too young to grasp the situation, happily swung his legs in her arms. The woman in the hospital bed looked fragile, her pale face framed by brown hair similar to Sophie's. When her eyes met the children, they immediately filled with tears. "My babies," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For a moment, no one moved. Time seemed suspended, as though they were in a frozen tableau. Sophie was the first to break the trance, taking a hesitant step forward while still holding Eleanor's hand. "Mom." Her voice was a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Sophie," Melissa said, stretching out her arms, tears flowing freely down her pale cheeks. "My brave Sophie." The girl took another few steps, pulling Eleanor along, clearly unwilling to let go of her hand. Ben remained half hidden, while Oliver observed everything curiously. "You've all grown so much," Melissa said through sobs. "Ben, my boy, And Oliver, my baby, you're so big now. Eleanor watched the reunion, conflicting emotions raging within her. It was undeniably moving. A mother reunited with the children she believed she'd lost. But a part of her, one she felt guilty admitting, felt like she was losing something too. I thought you were gone forever, Sophie said, her young voice carrying a hint of accusation. Like Dad. Melissa's face contorted in pain. No, honey, I'd never leave you by choice. I had a terrible accident and couldn't remember who I was. Once I finally did, all I wanted was to find you. We were alone, Sophie continued, her voice small but firm. I tried to take care of Ben and Oliver, but it was so hard. Melissa reached out a trembling hand, gently touching Sophie's face. I'm so sorry, my love, more sorry than I can ever say. You shouldn't have had to go through that. None of you should. Ben finally stepped forward, still unsure. Are you going to get better? Yes, sweetheart. Melissa smiled through her tears. I will. And we'll be together again. Eleanor felt a pang in her chest. Together again, the family reunited as it should be. That's what every child deserves. To grow up with the parent who loves them from day one. Sophie glanced at Eleanor, her eyes filled with conflicting feelings. Eleanor attempted a reassuring smile, though she knew her expression likely betrayed her own inner turmoil. The visit lasted nearly an hour. Gradually, the children relaxed. Ben approached the bed, though he kept looking back at Eleanor for reassurance. Oliver, ever curious, let Melissa hold his hand, though he clearly didn't remember her. Sophie remained in cautious middle ground, responding to her mother's questions, listening to her explanations, but never fully releasing Eleanor's hand. I waited so long, Sophie said at one point, tears finally escaping her carefully guarded eyes. But I thought you'd never come back. I'd have come back if I could, Melissa replied, voice breaking. You three are my whole life. I promise I'll never leave you again. Eleanor watched, torn between the joy of seeing the family reunited and the personal heartbreak of a looming goodbye. Would the children truly be safe? Melissa seemed genuine, but how would she rebuild a stable life for 3 kids after such trauma? When Diane finally suggested ending the visit, Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and dread. This is just the first step, the social worker explained as they left the room. There will be a transition period with regular visits before any final decision is made. The children's well-being is our top priority. Eleanor nodded, trying to find comfort in the fact that at least there wouldn't be an abrupt separation. That night, after putting Ben and Oliver to bed, Eleanor found Sophie sitting on the apartment balcony, gazing at the city lights. Can I sit with you? Eleanor asked. Sophie nodded, scooting over on the bench. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just watching the night skyline. I'm confused, Sophie finally admitted, her voice tiny against the vastness of the night. Me too, Eleanor confessed. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? Sophie nodded. I was happy to see Mom, but I'm scared too. Scared of what, sweetheart? It took Sophie a moment to respond. Of everything changing again. Of having to leave you. She turned to Eleanor, her eyes shining faintly. If Mom comes back, will you disappear too? The question struck Eleanor deeply. She gently held Sophie's small hands in her own. Never, she replied with all the sincerity she could muster. Even if things change, even if you and your brothers go live with your mom, I'll always be here for you. That's a promise, Sophie. Really? Really? Sophie leaned against Eleanor, who wrapped her in a protective embrace. Together, they watched what few stars were visible through the city lights. The future was uncertain, filled with changes and adjustments Eleanor couldn't fully imagine. But one thing she knew for sure, the love she felt for these 3 children was real and lasting. No matter what happened, they were now part of her life, and she was part of theirs. It wasn't the ending she had once envisioned, not exactly, but maybe it was the start of something just as meaningful. Melissa recovering her memory had been a miracle. The children reuniting with the mother they loved was a blessing, and Eleanor discovering a purpose, an extended family, and a capacity for love she never knew she had. This was a transformation. As she held Sophie under the starry sky, Eleanor realized she had found something far more valuable than any material fortune. She had found true human connection. And that, more than anything else, filled the emptiness she had carried within her for so long.